Hello, this is a video on the Divine Comedy and particularly on the figure of Beatrice, the saint woman that helps Dante to go to the height of the heavens, and which is generally interpreted in a literal way as if it was through the love of a particular woman that Dante knew the higher love, and as if she had the possibility to help him to go to God. But actually, a deeper meaning, if we look at the anagogical, at the spiritual sense of this figure, is that Beatrice represents the Kundalini, which is sleeping in each of us at the basis of the spine, and which spirally awakens, and spirally towards the left goes down in the walk that Dante and Virgilio do in hell, and spirally towards the right ascends in the Purgatory mountain, and at the end, after being activated, she is really ascending in the Shushumna, in the central channel of the chakras, and so going to the seventh sky, to the seventh chakra, which is the Candida Rosa, the mystical rose, or the flower of the thousand petals of the Buddha. This inner trip, which is so understood in a different key, helps to see also the different, in a different way, all the passages in which the doors and the rivers and all the separations that apparently are overcome by this trip, because this going, this traveling, actually is represented as if it was walking through doors and going to some paths, but actually it is only representing a movement of the consciousness which has some difficulties, and so they are represented by the mind as if they were doors and rivers. We find in the end of the Purgatory the completion of the process of preparation of the consciousness to this higher states of consciousness. They are prepared first by the visitation in the seven degrees, in the seven examination of the vices which become sins in hell, through the visitation of the people who are the dead, who accept the law of God, and so they are not rebelliant to it. But at the end, when the Purgatory ends in the Eden, which is really a genial and unprecedented idea of Dante to put the Eden on the top of the Purgatory. Until 1274, there was no Purgatory in the Catholic vision, and even then there is not a precise place where it is, and also Eden is not posed in the collocated in the same place as the Purgatory is. So this idea of Dante is really unprecedented, and it is very intelligent the way in which the completion of the purgation allows the reintegration in the Edenic state of consciousness, which is what allows after that the proceeding towards the skies until the meeting with God, with the formless. So this end of the Purgatory part of the comedy is very important, and we see here two aspects of Beatrice. In the Purgatory, she is more like a judge, which is demanding from Dante a complete confession, a complete leaving of any kind of deviation from the straight road which they will go together through right after in the first chant of paradise. So she's very insisting and very pressing on the fact that he had encountered her when he was still a kid, before puberty. So she is saying that Dante had met the Kundalini awakening when he was a small boy, and then when she comes again to him as an adult and he has completed part of the purification, she's asking to complete this purification, to be one with her and do not betray her anymore. So she's very strict in this, to the point that he faints. And at that point, the lady he had met in the paradise on earth, and which was prefigured in a dream, the third dream on the 27th chant of Purgatory, which is Matilda. So Matilda brings him through the river of the Lete, the river of forgetfulness, of oblivion. Lete has also a tradition in the Orphic tradition, in Plato, and many writers of ancient and modern literature, as the river of oblivion, of forgetting everything. It's a sort of going away from the world, and in the yoga it could also be called the pratyahara, like a turtle that retracts its limbs. So this moment of Lete is where he goes more deep in himself, and this is about 27 of Purgatory. And at the end of Purgatory, which is 33, in those 6 chants, he is subject to this judgment, to these visions, to this instruction, until he drinks of the second river, which is Eunoe, and in this way he remembers more deeply the Edenic state. He really is reintegrated, he re-enters the garden, and this second river is the one that gives again the remembrance of the primordial state of the mind, as the Buddhists would say, or the non-dual consciousness, we would say today. So this part of the comedy, in which Beatrice is like a judge asking him to relinquish any kind of resistance, is very important, because until the consciousness is prepared, the Kundalini cannot awaken without big troubles. Dante himself is in some trouble, but he is a very prepared being, very advanced soul, so it happens only through relinquishing any kind of point of reference. For example, also Virgilio disappears here, and he's really ready and pure to go to the stars, as he says at the end of the chant. But in normal people, in which Kundalini awakens, they are less prepared generally than Dante was, and so this is where psychiatry begins. I'm a psychiatrist, and I see continuously people who have a sort of difficulty. They try to run away, they try to control a process which is being an identity crisis, seeing who they really are. I found myself, says Dante at the beginning, which is not Dante finding himself, but it's the true self finding himself. And generally they are accompanied, these processes of identity crisis, by these Kundalini movements, like if it was a birth. So there are these contractions, there's periodical activations of purification processes, and if the consciousness is not prepared and still clinging on to the ego, then suffering is really, could be very intense. And the medical approach, which is only biomedical, or maximum it is psychological, so talking about the me, not about the self, it's not transpersonal, so they are not so much helped to understand and to be accompanied in this process, which is what the Divine Comedy is about. It is about this transformation of consciousness from the me to the self. So in this end of the Purgatory, Beatrice is very intense because of this necessity to be completely pure before ascending to the skies. In the second part of this talk, I want to see a different kind of Beatrice appearing in the first chant of Paradise. She will accompany him until the end, so what we see here is already a prefiguration of the whole Paradise. She is here now not against Dante, but always a compassionate and friendly and motherly and centered and present figure. And she instructs him, but really it is the souls of the paradise that instruct him, and she's sometimes learning with Dante from them. And she is beginning the chant by looking at the sun. So the first sentences of the third part of the Comedy of Paradise start with God, which is the mover of everything and which resplends and penetrates differently in the different creatures of the universe, was seen already in the creation by Dante, but also he says that he has been in this paradise in the highest of the skies. So he can talk by experience, but he cannot so easily remember and tell what he saw. In spite of this, he is making an invocation to Apollo, the god of the light and of fire, to help him and to do with him as he did with Marcia, which was, in a mythological tale of Ovidio, overcome by Apollo in a musical, so to call, fight. But actually this mythological figure, Marcia, was trying to emulate and to become like this god. He becomes like the god by relinquishing his human body and his human nature. Actually, when he loses in this fight, in which the flute is representing again the central rod with the chakras, let's not go too much into detail about this, but what Apollo does to Marcia at the end of the fight is to take him out of his skin, of his muscles, of his body, like as if the body was the birthplace, like as if it was a vagina. And so it is a birth, a spiritual birth that he describes at the beginning of this first chant of Paradise. After this invocation to Apollo, he looks at Beatrice and he sees that Beatrice is looking at the sun again. And as if he was one with Beatrice, he also looks at the sun, which can be done only in a particular condition, like the one in Eden, where things are possible that otherwise are not possible. And he sees as if the sun was beginning to become even more luminous, and a second sun would be lit in the sky. So there is this multiplication of the light that overwhelms him. And then when he looks at Beatrice, he sees that Beatrice is looking into the infinite, as if in a sort of deep meditation. And what happens here is that he feels a sort of transformation, the transhumanation he's talking about, and which is possible not only for Dante but for each of us if we understand the anagogical meaning, is that this alchemical process in consciousness can happen in each of us, and this is a perfect map of how the stages and help and the conditions are in this trip, in this journey. So when he looks at Beatrice, what happens into him is, again he uses an analogy from Ovidio, which is what happened to Glauco. Glauco was a fisherman in a part of Greece, and what happened to him is that he saw that a certain particular herb that the fishes could eventually touch, which was growing there near the sea, would make them revive and they would go back to the sea. So he wanted to try this on himself, and what happened to him, which was, he was already a son of Poseidon, he was a semigod. He was transformed somehow physically, because he became somehow a fish and went himself into the sea, and the gods took him with them. So he was sort of going to the place of the gods. He became a god through this transformation, and from earth he went into the ocean. This kind of transformation from the interior was what Dante was describing when he was looking at Beatrice. So he was overcome by from the inside, and at this point he was very overcome by stupor, by surprise, and he had some questions in his mind. He had two doubts he wanted to speak about with Beatrice, but Beatrice, even without him speaking, decides to answer. And this happens very often in Paradise, that the souls know already what Dante wants to ask him. And she answers that to the first question of what is happening here is, we are not on the earth as you are believing, but we are already going back to the sky in the same way and even more rapidly than a lightning would do coming from the clouds to the earth. So he goes back to where he came from as rapidly and even more than a lightning. This is clearly the expression of the Kundalini activated and pushing him very rapidly towards the source. And the second doubt will be, but how is this possible that this happens? How is the word of God organized, so to say? And the rest of the chant is by Beatrice, an explanation of how things are actually in the world when you see them from a different perspective than the one we have on the earth. But we will not enter into this now. We will stop here for this very short introduction to the Divine Comedy in the anagogic key, which would really be very interesting to prosecute, and I would like to be in touch with people that would have a similar approach to this kind of literature, but also to other artistic productions that try to tell us about ourselves on a different way. Thank you for your patience.